The 2023 edition of the Africa Travel Indaba is an iconic African leisure trade show. It's just completed its run and, of course, owned and run by South African Tourism. The event has just concluded in Durban and it showcased, as always, the rich diversity of African traditions and experiences. Now, Africa tourism economy is in recovery after being hit hard by the COVID-19 pandemic over the last while. Kojo Bentum-Williams attended the event. He is currently the senior expert for communications in Africa for the United Nations World Tourism Organization. He's a passionate traveler and tourism writer and publicist who runs his own site called voyagesafrique.com. And he joins us now virtually from Accra. Thank you so much for your time this morning, Kojo, and I'm sure still recovering from your time in South Africa. Before we talk about the Indaba itself, I was wondering if I could pick your brain just on the sense of that you got of the state of how tourism is being run in South Africa. Of course, we're all quite insular when it comes to there being drama inside our government-run entities. And I'm sure you know, in the lead up to this year's edition of the Travel Indaba, the big travel or tourism industry stories in South Africa wasn't the best of news when it comes to tourism in South Africa. We just got a new Minister of Tourism in Patricia de Lille, and one of the biggest things she had to deal with was this mess regarding a potential deal, $1 million deal between South African tourism and the English Premiership side, Tottenham Hotspurs. So there's a lot of that still being spoken about in the lead up to this Indaba. But we can be quite insular and think that those are the biggest issues inside our tourism industry. What is the sense that you got about looking at tourism in South Africa, about whether that perhaps was a storm in a teacup and that we actually have more to be positive about in South African tourism than we think? Oh,
okay. Can you hear me? I think that
yes,
the
we can hear you. Please go ahead.
Stable, but I don't know if you can hear me. Then I can proceed. Can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. So thank you for having me. And yeah, for me, of course, I mean, South African tourism, or tourism in South Africa in terms of its leadership and what it represents, is always been a benchmark on the continent. Again, I mean, for things that are happening, proud to that, we also in the news some of the governance issues, and we've got a new minister, etc. The positive things that I picked up from it was the fact that, in the run-up to the event and the things that were happening and all of that, you rarely didn't, at least for the optics of it and for the real business of the show, one couldn't see unless you're very close to the situation. So there's, again, also tells you there was some bit of transition that was managed well. But having said that, I guess the processes that have been put in place by the minister and by the board itself would allow the public to know exactly what ought to be done at the entity. But from where I sit as an African, a tourism person, I've always seen that South Africa had always charted the path for the tourism on the continent, both in governance structures, at the same time around how they've made tourism in a real sector. I mean, there are challenges, but if you go, if you're out on the continent, then you'd quite understand what I'm saying. In South Africa, obviously, it's at an advanced stage of tourism development and administration. So I believe that yes, it was very concerning for people who were closer to to the situation. But the good thing for me was that you felt the run. The show went on successfully without having to be stopped by the things happening.
What for you, in terms of what you've taken away from how the tourism industry, both in South Africa and on the continent, are dealing with it, what for you is important? I see on your website you wrote a story about the state of SAA. I'm sure you believe that the health of strong national carriers on the continent is very important for the tourism industry across the continent to thrive.
Look, for me, my takeout from the African Travel Indaba was great, and the fact that first of all, if you look at how the thing even started, the bond day, the sessions, etc., these were the topical issues that was plaguing the sector, not just South Africa, but on the continent. And so, if you had put people together to speak or to shed light on how things were going, these were very, critical for us to see where we are going, what are the benchmarks, and how we can peer review as countries in Africa. So for me, these were very strong highlights. Again, if you look at the sessions that were held, and it took me straight to the one with Richard Quest and the panel, it was a real hard talk, and the minister had to speak to the issues and all the panels there, and it wasn't your classic wanting to save face. So these things were issues that ought to be speaking to. And if you speak to even businesses, this year was different. They made a lot of business on the floor. It was as if even COVID never happened. But again, we also needed to tread cautiously to the fact that, or on the point that we still couldn't do things the same like we used to do. So the highlights for me was the fact that, and it's been said over and over again, collaboration and innovation of our tourism industry, and how we can be able to grow as a continent. And if you look at the case in point that you mentioned with SAA, that was a great news for people who travel not just to South Africa, Southern Africa, and what SAA represents. What it has done is the fact that it has also given more air access and make it competitive for other carriers coming to the region. So I think that was a great news that we all had, and the fact that they're going to get a new fleet and the trajectory that they are. So these are the highlights for me that we can always celebrate. But also just to add to the fact that the government or the deputy minister and the minister didn't shy away from putting out the issues around security and what government was doing to be able to improve, because that was very critical.
And I see you also highlighted the fact that the minister addressed them still working on being able to get e-visas going for travel across Africa again. But that's almost a conversation all on its own that we'll have to follow up on. Just before I let you go, very quickly, because we have unfortunately run out of time. Coming away from the Travel Indaba, if two things I want to pick your brain on. If you had to tell somebody what they need to go and visit, or what area they need to visit in South Africa, and they're traveling from elsewhere in Africa, where would you tell them to go, A? And where in Africa would you tell a South African, perhaps, to go and visit if they had to pick one place to go and visit right now? What are those two hotspots, both in South Africa and then elsewhere on the continent?
Look, you're putting me on the spot, okay? And if you ask me to say in South Africa,
just off the top of your head,
one of the greatest people. Look, on top of my head, for me, I think is the one people of South Africa. And if I'm to choose again, even where we're coming from in Durban was great. What amazing. Africa, I'm not sure I can particularly pinpoint one country, but what's happening that I want to say is the fact that lots of our countries and destinations here in Africa are putting measures in place to be able to scale up tourism. So if you go to, for example, Cabo Verde, if you go to Seychelles, if you go to Ghana, if you go to Nigeria, all of that, there are differences, and you have the diversity that makes we stand out. So I'll tell you what, that if you want to put me straight on a spot of which country people should visit, unfortunately I will disappoint, but to say that there are lots of them right now that our people don't know about. And I guess the other strong point that came out strongly was the fact that, look, we need to be able to give product knowledge about the continent and what it represents. That's what I'm saying. If I tell somebody to go to Cabo Verde, I mean, perhaps they may not have even heard before, or visit Ghana or other countries that they have something unique that we're able to speak to it and encourage our people to visit to promote the intra-Africa travel.
Yeah, I suppose we actually just need to make a list. Maybe you can do that on your website. Make a list and say, these are the bucket list places in Africa that you need to visit, and people can just work their way through it because you said so. Thank you so much. That is Kojo Bentum-Williams joining us live from Accra in Ghana. Unfortunately, lost his picture there, so we couldn't really have a good look at him. He's a tourism boggler, he's a publicist, and have a look at his website, Voyages Africa. afrique.com or